Please be seated. I'm going to carry on with our study from Tozer today. And this one doesn't really have a title. It's Reality and Reckoning. But you'll see it's about more than that in just a little bit. Okay? So there are actually 5 scriptures, and we'll see if anybody can figure out why there's 5 scriptures. There's not going to be a test, but they're there for a reason. Psalm 34:8 says, "Oh, taste and see." Psalm 45:8 says, "All your robes are fragrant with myrrh and aloes and cassia. From palaces adorned with ivory, the music of the strings make you glad." John 10:27 says, "My sheep listen to my voice. I know them, and they follow me." Matthew 5:8, "Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God." Matthew 8:3, Jesus reached out his hand and touched the man. Immediately he was cleansed of his leprosy. So did anybody, you don't have to answer, but did anybody figure out what those 5 scriptures have in common? 5 fingers? Oh, somebody. 5 senses were mentioned in there. Sight, hearing, smell, taste, and touch. And that's what we're going to kind of focus on a little bit today. Tozer says, "For millions of Christians, God is no more real than he is to non-Christians." I'm going to say that again. For millions of Christians, God is no more real than he is to non-Christians. Said for many Christians, God is an inference, not a reality. Remember, this whole thing is kind of relationships. So many people have God in their lives, but there's not really a relationship there. He is what's left when you deduct all the evidence away. So when you take all the evidence and boil it all down, God is what's left. When you can't explain something, we say it's God. Whether we believe it or not, when we can't explain something, well, it's God. He must be, therefore I believe he is. He must be, therefore I believe he is. Now that's strange. But we've all been told there's a core to the center of the earth, right? I don't know if anybody's ever seen it. But it must be, so I believe it is. Does that make sense? Some don't go that far. For some people, God is just hearsay. They've heard about it all their life, and they just go along with it. Okay? Sometimes people are loyal to God in the same way that they're loyal to political parties. Okay? Now, I come from kind of a different background. The Pennsel side were always Republicans, but the Langston side was yellow dog Democrats. If you don't know what that meant they would have voted for a yellow dog before they voted for a Republican. Okay? Marvin and Amelia Langston were the committee man and committee woman for Whitewater Township or whatever for I don't know how many years. And I didn't even know that meant that they actually put the votes in their car and drove it from Whitewater to Cape County, or at the courthouse to be counted. That's what they used to do.
That was judges.
Okay, well they were that too. Whatever. Anyway, they were big, strong Democrats. Actually, they were so strong that I didn't even tell them that my fiance worked for Bill Emerson, because he was a Republican. Okay? But some people are as loyal to, they follow God just the way they follow the political party, because that's what the whole family's done. They never really thought a lot about it. I didn't mention this last week, but I should have. There was a very elderly lady, I think she was 97, Dr. Marilyn Stavanger, who taught at Eden Seminary. And I've only taken one class there, and that was the polity class, and Dr. Stavanger taught it. And she was a jewel. You didn't have to say, "Tell me how you really thought." Okay, she was going to tell you. And it made me think about her, though, in this whole thing of just kind of like following along with all we've been taught, because someone asked a question, and she said, "God forbid we ask you to think about him." There's a lot of wisdom in that. God forbid we ask you to think about him. Because sometimes it's easier if we don't think about it. If we just say, "Oh, that's the way God wanted it." Okay? It's easier, because then we don't have to deal with any repercussions. For some, God's just an ideal. the beauty of nature, the warmth of a fire. God's just kind of an ideal. He kind of floats around out there. But when the rubber meets the road, they're kind of lukewarm about the whole idea. The one thing all of these ideas about God have in common is that none of the people that we talked about, none of these kinds of people that have these beliefs have mentioned any kind of a personal relationship with God. If you think about it, everyone I said, like the hearsay or just the nature, they don't have a personal relationship. They admit his existence, but they don't know him in the sense that they know other people. And I firmly believe that the vast majority of Christians probably do fall into that category. And that's exactly what Tozer was saying, is that for many millions of Christians, God is no more real than he is for non-Christians. They may say they believe, but there's no relationship there. These people go through life trying to love an ideal or a principle rather than loving the being. Scripture tells us differently. And if you listened carefully a while ago, that was good. If not, you're going to get to hear them all again. Because Psalms 38:4 says, "Oh, taste and see." Psalms 45:8 says, "All your robes are fragrant with myrrh and aloes and cassia. From palaces adorned with ivory, the music of the strings makes you glad." Smell the fragrance. Taste and see. John 10:27 says, "My sheep listen to my voice. I know them and they follow me." Listen. It's hearing. Now, I know there's a difference between hearing and listening, but hearing. Matthew 5:8 says, "Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God." And Matthew 8:3 says, "Jesus reached out his hand and touched the man. Immediately he was cleansed with his leprosy." What's this mean? What does it mean? That God has equipped us with a way to know him physically. He's given us 5 ways. He's went further than that, though. Not only has he given us 5 physical senses, he's given us as human beings something else. He's given us hearts, he's given us thoughts, and he's given us feelings. And those all wrapped together gives us something we call emotions. That's what Tozer calls your spiritual senses. So he says we have 5 senses, but we have spiritual senses too. And when hearts and thoughts and feelings and emotions combine with taste, touch, sight, smell, and hearing, it's those very things that make us human the way God wanted us to be. It's the very thing that we need to create a relationship with someone. Okay? You can see someone and have no relationship with them. You can smell someone and have no relationship with them. Okay? You can touch someone and have no relationship with them. Hashtag me too. Okay? You too, whatever it is. But you can have all 5 of those. And think about it, you can easily have that. Okay? But when you start putting in the emotion, the feeling, the love, the relationships, that's when your relationship deepens. When you reach out your hand to shake someone else's hand, it tells you what? Oh, I want to touch your hand? That's not what it says. It says, I'm happy to meet you, or it's good to see you. There's an emotion tied with shaking someone's hand. When you hug someone, you are physically touching them, and you're probably smelling them. And I don't mean that in a bad way, but when you hug someone, you're going to see what they're wearing. You're going to smell their perfume or cologne. But it's not just the touch. It's the emotion that goes with the hug. Does that make sense? It's what creates the relationship. Okay? He goes on to say, then why is it so hard to recreate a relationship with God? And one of the things I was trying to point out with the children's message is one of the reasons it's hard to create a relationship with God is because we can't smell him, touch him, see him. We don't have the 5 physical senses to rely on. We have to rely on our spiritual senses. And Tozer back in 1940-something said that the world is troubled with chronic disbelief. Faith allows our spiritual sense to function. Faith allows our spiritual sense to function because faith is the belief in the things we cannot see or smell or touch. But we think they're there anyway. But in those times when we can't see or touch or smell, that's when unbelief sneaks in. And all it takes is that little bit of doubt to erode what faith we have. Just a touch of doubt. He talks about reality and reckoning. The reality is defined as the totality of real things and events. It's the world in which we live. It's the totality of everything around us. And if you've ever heard the phrase, perception is reality, it means we believe what we perceive. We believe what we perceive. That's why criminal cases are hard when you call witnesses. Because you can't take the perception out of what they saw. You can't do it. And it depends on the time you looked up on what you saw exactly. Reckoning, he says, is to accept something as certain. Okay? Now, if you think about this, we reckon our financial accounts, don't we? Do you ever go, do you remember, we don't say it as much anymore, but remember people talk about reckoning their checkbook? Reckoning their checkbook. My mom would sit down about once a month and she'd reckon the checkbook. And I always thought that was just some phrase she was saying. No, it's actually a word. Okay? It means to make right. Have you ever said, well, I reckon I better get up and get at it? Okay? Well, that wasn't just a phrase. That meant it was time. I needed to get up and do this. And accept that the work isn't going away. It's there. When relationship with God comes with the meeting of the reality and reckoning, that's when things start happening. When your reality, the things you experience with your five senses, meets the spiritual senses, the emotions, the relationships, and all of those things, when taste and touch and smell and sight and hearing meet emotions and thoughts and feelings, we begin to perceive God in the world that we are living. Whenever you look out at that sunset and you think, wow, how pretty, and it causes a memory, it causes something in your heart to feel warm, it means there's a little relationship beginning there with God. You're not just saying, oh, didn't God paint a pretty sunset? There's a difference in saying, didn't God paint a pretty sunset, and feeling something inside when you see it. Now, how many of you have ever been to a worship service here or someplace else where we sang a certain hymn, and it just made you feel good, okay? And it wasn't necessarily just the singing, it was the words. It was the organ playing. You could feel the organ. It was the other people singing around you. It was the collective group of all those senses coming together and tugging and pulling on those emotions. And I'm going to throw this in, and this was totally not on the notes, but I think that the Wink family and the Glicks will have a lot of this week, because when you go through a loss, you have a lot of hugging, you have a lot of touching, you have a lot of crying, and all of those things are often tied with a memory or something because you had a relationship with the person. When we begin to reckon ourselves with our reality, reckon again means accept something as certain. And reality is the totality of real things and events. To totally accept things that are real and certain with your senses and your spiritual senses. Then we will begin to focus on God. The things of the world will take shape in front of our eyes, and we'll begin to see a great and glorious wonder that is God. So when you go through this week, think about your spiritual senses. Those things that often we struggle with those feelings and thoughts and emotions, and how they work with your five senses. And when they're working together, you're creating relationships and deepening things. Amen. emails to 189.